We're here today and very glad to be here today to share with you our experiences of bringing various types of community storytelling programs to our library in the hopes that these experiences will inspire you all, if you haven't already, to experiment a little, take a few risks on community storytelling at your library.
So before we get into the meat of it, we just want to go over where Fresno County is, in case you're not familiar with us. We're in the middle. It's the easiest way to put it. We cover about 6,000 square miles. We have almost 1 million residents in our county, and Fresno County Public Library has over 30 branches throughout the entire county. We have a very diverse population. Almost a quarter, 22% of our residents are immigrants, and nearly half of them don't speak English at home. And you can see from our cute little infographic that there's just a bunch of different groups that rank in our diversity.
Okay, so over the years, sorry, it's a little close there. Over the years, we've really made a commitment to not only acknowledging but really spotlighting and celebrating this diversity that we view as an asset to our community. We're a huge county, but there's just a lot of variation, and it's I think in both of our opinions, it's very beautiful. And so typically this has taken the form of observing Heritage Months, centering programs on those special months throughout the year, but also increasingly we're partnering with community organizations with ties to our local ethnic communities. And so we've worked with the Fresno Black Chamber of Commerce, Arte Americas, and that's just kind of a really brief sampling of all the partnerships we have. There's actually a lot ongoing, but these are often, unfortunately, these are often one-shot opportunities. So in fall of 2016, we actually had a really unique opportunity to celebrate our diversity in a very different way, a more extensive way, certainly. And that was actually through the California Listens program, which was a statewide, probably quite a few people would have heard of it in here, but it was a statewide project to collect stories about being Californian that the California State Library sponsored in partnership with Khalifa and Story Center, which is a Berkeley-based organization, very similar in some ways to, they do work very similar in some ways to what StoryCorps does. And these stories, of course, although they existed for the capturing, these were part of these were people's life experiences. They didn't make anything up, but they did have to be translated into a digital format. And we were one of the libraries selected to recruit people to tell their stories in that format and kind of help shepherd them through that process of creating digital stories. And so in partnership with Story Center, we did a 2-day digital storytelling workshop. Before we could get there, however, once we did get there, it was actually fairly smooth sailing. But before we could get to the workshop, we actually had to do quite a bit of legwork to even recruit our storytellers, because Michelle gave you a little bit of context for Fresno County earlier. But one of the things that those numbers don't quite reveal is just how unfamiliar our population was with things like digital storytelling. It wasn't even really a concept most people were familiar with. And so we kind of had to educate anybody we were planning to recruit on what that was. Once they understood what it was, they were very excited. And ultimately we recruited a very, just a great cross section of our community as storytellers. And they accomplished a surprising amount for the time that they were given. Day one, we took them from, brainstorming which experiences they might want to focus on for their digital story, to beginning the audio recording And then by day 2, we had rough edits of these stories completed, and that is phenomenal when you when you take into account that we had such variable levels of technological skill. Within our group, we had quite a few people that were unfamiliar, or not unfamiliar, but uncomfortable even attaching files to an email. That by the end of day 2, they were working in a video editor with help. But, it was definitely, these were personal accomplishments, and they were very meaningful to everyone involved. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did use wevideo.com. That there is a free version of that. We used the paid version so that there was no watermark, but that was handled through the grant. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so to kind of give you an idea of what our workshop looked like, I've included a few pictures here. Essentially, this big picture you're going to see, that was our main room at the Betty Rodriguez Regional Library. Those people worked together in that room for essentially two full work days. They were weekdays, so they actually had to take off from their normal jobs to be there. And that was pretty much the only thing that they had in common. Which was both exciting and terrifying for me, because I was kind of the main coordinator of it, and I was just thinking, I hope they get along. I think they're going to get along. I mean, they all had that common interest at least. But if we look at in our next slide, we're going to see just kind of how diverse these folks were. We had everything from the artsy types that you would expect to be attracted to something like this. Like we had our Fresno's poet laureate at the time. We had a fiber artist who was a retired teacher. But we had, retired police officers. We had a local transgender activist. We had a very, very conservative guy that was at first kind of, I think, struggling to see where he would fit in with everybody else. So in addition to the amount of self-discipline it took to complete the videos in those 2 days, there was also a lot of work went into the collaboration between those people. Everyone had to put forth an effort to ensure that this environment was productive for everybody and supportive for everybody. And so in the end, we accomplished our stated goals of collecting the stories that we wanted. We had a kind of a set number of stories we were aiming for. We did get a cross-section, as I mentioned, of our population participating in this, and the stories just were, you can actually view them on our YouTube channel, and we unfortunately don't have time to feature them today, but they are just beautiful. I mean, it's like there's no other way it sounds warm and fuzzy, but they really are fantastic, and they're all so different. Not only are the experiences different, but the ways of presenting these experiences are just, depending on the storyteller, is very personalized. But beyond that, and certainly those are wonderful artifacts to have of this process. Beyond that, the process seems to have meant the most to our storytellers, which is kind of an odd thing because we focus on, okay, what was produced. What is the specific thing that we can look at that, okay, this was the finished thing. But it was the engagement between storytellers that our storytellers kept coming back to, and they actually wanted to hang out with each other again after the workshop. So we did a screening of the videos, and some of them have kept in touch. And most of the connection making happened within the first day, which is pretty insane. You had, you of course had your, expected connections happening. Like for instance, our poet laureate and our fiber artist hit it off right away. They had a lot in common, that kind of creative affinity, but during the breaks, when our storytellers were kind of allowed to do whatever they wanted, they didn't have to engage with anybody. During one of those times, I looked over and saw a our extremely conservative storyteller that I alluded to earlier, talking with our transgender activist in the group, and knowing what I did, because I had interacted a lot with these people prior to the workshop, knowing what I did about each of them, I was thinking, do I need to interfere? I really hope this is going okay. But then I stepped back, like before I, walked over there, I kind of paused for a sec, and I'm glad I did, because I would have interrupted a really beautiful moment. They were, of course, I was eavesdropping, but they were interacting on such a human level. It didn't matter. They actually, even though they were discussing their differences, clearly the differences were not what interested them at that point. It was, how did you get to this point? How did you become the person who is present at this workshop? What matters to you? Why does that matter to you? They were really finding common ground out of what didn't appear to be a very fertile ground for finding it, and that continued actually into day 2, and there was just definitely a spirit of mutual respect among everybody, even the people that we didn't walk in having much faith in, things working out between. So it definitely caused a perception change for me and the other library staff who were at that event as to what we could expect, from our community, and why we might want to experiment further with such a thing. Fortunately, we had another opportunity to work with Story Center and their innovative community storytelling practices. They were at the time developing, this was last spring, this spring. They were developing a tool to make it even easier for people to share stories, to share interviews, kind of more StoryCorps style stuff going on. But kind of reducing that barrier to sharing through something that they like to call the listening station. It is basically, as you can see from this image, it is basically an iPad based recording station. That's a mic stand. I actually laughed when I came in here because this looks like the base of the listening station. That is essentially what it is. It's a mic stand with an iPad and a specialized app in it. And it really, even as simple as it is, it really has opened up what we're able to do. Our first project with it, we decided to call Now and Then, because we wanted to focus on collecting multi-generational perspectives on issues affecting Fresno County. Now, similar to California Listens, when we were organizing this, we left the topic choice fairly broad, because we knew, or at least had a hunch, based on our prior experience, that if we respected our community enough to let them structure, kind of let them bring their experiences to our event, to our project, that they would come through for us, and that it would be an interesting result. And so it did involve a little bit of risk, but it was an educated risk, and it was one I was willing to take. And I'm really glad that I did, that I left it that open, because we captured a range of conversations. Some of our participants were from, very established communities, and parts of Fresno County that, where you would expect, where you would expect people to be attracted to this kind of event from. And then you also had we had some new voices. We had some marginalized communities participating in this, and seeing it as a really great opportunity for advocacy, and finding a lot of meaning in that. Okay. And so again, we did have some concrete results from this. We did collect these interviews, and they are part of our growing collection of community generated content that we're building to try to, diversify who we're including in the library and in the narrative of our community. But again, what we found was that the process mattered more to these people than the end product, which over and over again, you're probably going to hear us reiterating this trend, but it's quite interesting that even just offering the opportunity to share your story, offering the opportunity to then circulate that story, even just situating ourselves as an organization that is welcoming of that has changed their relationship with the library, but also their agency within the community. And it's very empowering for them. And it's something that that's actually not just us saying that, us inferring that. They did come back later and they were like, this is great. When are we going to do more of these things? Or I have a special project I would like to involve this in. So yeah, we're certainly excited to do more. So as a result of our experiences with both the listening station, which I just discussed, and our earlier experiences with California Listens, we developed we being myself and another library staff member, recently developed and launched a program at one of our local branches, which we like to call Story Jam. And Story Jam is essentially it grew out of the Story Circle process. It was very directly inspired by that. And again, the Story Circle was the period in the California Listens workshop where storytellers were just sharing their ideas about what they wanted to speak about in their story, what they wanted to convey to California and potentially the rest of the world, because YouTube, they knew we were going to feature it on our YouTube channel too. So, but it was a very judgment-free zone. It was a very safe space, and the ground rules for that and the experience it created for those people, we wanted to replicate that. I certainly wanted everybody to be able to have that experience, because how often do we really feel safe interacting with people who are very different from us? It's just a self-preservation thing. We just don't do it unless we're given a structured opportunity in many cases. So yes, it's a monthly event. We've been doing this consistently since May, and we never know what we're going to get, which is, I think, the beauty of it. We purposely leave it open because people are coming to our event for different reasons. Some of them, just want to share like a, I can't believe this happened sort of story, funny things. Others have some sort of heartwarming or life-changing experience that they want to communicate. And we also have, so our stories run the gamut from the lighthearted to the more cathartic. And regardless of which stories are shared, people are really taking to this. There's just, and these are just a few trends in some of the feedback that we're getting. But this is a lot of fun, very therapeutic. Actually, we hear that a lot, which is interesting because sometimes that comes from people who are not sharing their stories. They're just coming to listen. And so there are different ways of engaging that we're facilitating through this event. And can you go back to that one momentarily? Okay. And and we've had several people say that this is a type of engagement that they don't get in their everyday lives. So it's a simple thing, but it appears to be very meaningful for quite a few of our community members who regularly attend. Okay. So again, our Story Jam creates a very even playing field. We won't go into the ground rules here, but we do have a handout over there on this side if you guys are interested. And it just really ensures that it's a safe space for everyone. And because we have pretty much the only organization required is to make sure people are aware of these expectations for behavior. We've never had to enforce these. People are pretty self-policing. It's on the honor system, but again, just kind of have faith in your community, and it works, and it's amazing. And no fancy setup. It requires, beyond branch operation, requires zero money to do this. And we've had an average of 20, 25 people at each of these, 32 at our first one. And this is about the amount of open space that we have to do it in at that particular branch. It's a very cozy, we'll call it cozy, environment. As far as I know, we've never exceeded the fire marshal, limit. Luckily there wasn't an emergency on that first night. But we've seen some subtle shifts in how people are interacting as a result of coming to these things. Again, you never know who you're going to get. You never know what stories they're going to tell. And often people really surprise you. We had, this is just, and I'm hoping I'm not going to get too emotional about this, but we had, because I almost always seem to, but a couple times ago we had a woman who had attended several story jams, and never told a story, seemed very uncomfortable with the idea. But then the one night she did get up and wanted to tell her story, and she, I'm not exactly sure of her situation, but she has some sort of communicative hindrance, some sort of challenges there. And so she got up to tell her story. Her husband, who always comes with her, when she was struggling, suggested that perhaps they should try another night. Maybe, we should let the kind people go home, and we'll just, we'll go ahead and, map this out better for next time. And she ultimately, though, was not interrupted because, or was not, taken home at that point, because we had somebody immediately jump to her defense and say, no, don't disrespect her, man. She's trying to tell her story. And immediately it was like this chorus of voices like, yeah, we're following it. And it was a very disjointed story. It wasn't clear where it was going. But that didn't matter to anybody in that room at that moment. The husband was a little self-conscious, but everybody was invested. At that point, she was the story. And these people had never met before. I think that that's important to realize as well. They had never met. Actually, the first guy who interjected, he had recently been released from prison. So, these are very different people that you might have assumptions about walking into it, and within seconds, those were overturned. And this happens consistently. And it's inspiring, and I think that it certainly is changing the way that we interact with our library customers, our community, and how they're interacting with the library, because they're viewing us as a community space more and more. We have seen, considerable changes, subtle, but considerable changes in how we approach programs, and some of this dovetails as a result of our community storytelling work. Some of this dovetails with, actually considerably, with Michelle Gordon's California Center for the Book project.
Yeah. So last year, I applied for the California Center for the Book program, which is, the community conversations about immigration. And the idea behind the program was that you would have to create 4 programs of any kind that would facilitate conversation among people about coming to California. And at the same time, I knew I would also be applying for the Library Innovations Lab from California Humanities that was also about immigration, that we would probably be able to work into this. And I sat with my office mates and we were like, what are we going to do with this? How are we going to do this? And we decided that we were going to create a series of ways for people to tell their stories in different formats. And we decided on 4 different formats. Food, because it's a great way to get people involved. Everyone loves programs that involve food. And written stories and physical artwork. And then we were thinking like something like an open mic night. So our first one that we did was the food. And it was a logistical nightmare, but it worked. The location that we did it in was donated to us, which was very kind from one of our community partners. And the Friends of the Library funded the supplies because we only wanted people to bring food. We supplied the warming dishes, the beverages, the serving, all of that stuff. We did all of that. The only thing people brought was themselves and their food and the stories that come with this food. So people would bring, my grandmother's recipe, or I'm from so-and-so and this is what we eat there kind of stories. And we had this crazy array of food. And one of the things that we did to facilitate the storytelling was we handed out these handouts that I know from a distance it looks like the 10 Commandments, but it's an open book. And they were able to write down, where their dish comes from or what it's about or a fun story about it, so that people would be able to know something about it other than, ooh, food. And we had seriously a crazy array of food. There was a Zwieback bread, which is like a Mennonite bread. We have a large Mennonite community in Fresno. And some American food, because, you can't have a potluck without chili. And we had a sopas station, which was like the most popular. It was actually voted the most popular. They got a special gift card for that. And a Hawaiian pork station. There were these Thai noodles that everybody loved. And there was some some Indian food that I didn't actually get a chance to take a photo of because they were gone before I had a chance to take a photo of them. Some Swedish butter cookies, some collard greens, because we had someone from Georgia and she brought her collard greens with her. That was awesome. And my favorite was the absolutely destroyed Tres Leches cake. And it was gone quickly. I'm lucky that I even got a chance to try it because it was delicious. But the amazing thing besides the food was the people. These people didn't know each other. In this picture, there's a married couple and then 3 other people that none of these people knew each other. They sat at a table, they broke bread, and they talked. And when were they going to have an opportunity to sit down with people that they've never would have come across in their just general everyday life? So that was a really nice part of it, was being able to share just, dinner stories with everybody. We had 42 people come. There were 22 different dishes. There were over a dozen different nationalities represented. And of course, we did a little library business on the side, making a few library cards. We took a pop-up of cookbooks because, so we checked out a couple cookbooks while we were there. And then it was the responses that mattered afterwards. California Center for the Book had specific questions for us. And one of them was, what'd you learn about your community members? And it worked. Like, they're like, wow, it's a really diverse, offering that we had here. We learned things about people's backgrounds that we wouldn't have known otherwise. And then of course, when's the next one, which terrified me, but it was a nice response. And then of course, is the library valuable to you, to your community? And the most important response to us, obviously, is that we provide a safe space for this kind of event. And it's very important for us when we do these community storytellings that it's only going to work if they consider us a trusted person in the community, that we provide these safe spaces for them. So it was nice to hear that as feedback that it was working. And the second one was the written word. And so what we did is very passive, and people can submit their stories by email or dropping them off at the branches, and then we post them online. We post them anonymously, so there's no problems with privacy. It's been the least successful out of the 4 that we did, and really because it's a passive program, there's no event attached to it. But we do have a really nice variety of stories. We got a citizenship class from the local adult school that provided some stories about their journeys in coming to America and why they're coming here and what they love about being here. And those are up. We created a website for the whole series. It's called californiathejourney.blogspot.com, and all of this stuff is on there. The third arm of the series was the most terrifying for me, because I know nothing about art, and I was asking people in the community to submit their artwork about their journey to California. and I didn't know if we were going to get the art submissions. I didn't know what kind of art we were going to get. And seriously, I look at art and I'm like, ooh, pretty. I don't know anything about it. I don't know how to hang art. I don't know any of this. Fresno has this thing called Art Hop where it's like the gallery is the city. So there's different stops downtown and then on the outskirts. And one of our library branches is a participant in this monthly thing. We have this reception and the art stays up all month. So I was asking these folks to give me their art for a month, and then we would have this one night of a reception, and I was shocked. It worked. We got some incredible art from some very high-end professional artists all the way down to someone who described herself as a closet painter. Her parents, her family didn't even know that she was doing this, and she gave us her art to put up for a whole month. Now, the library branch that we were at has the gallery hooks, so they make it really easy to hang up, because otherwise it would have been a nightmare. But I had a local art professor from Fresno Pacific that helped me so that it didn't look like an amateur put it up. We also had our graphics department make little labels that would help explain everything. And the night of the reception was a huge success. We had 68 people come through to look at the art, and of course it was up all month, so more people were able to view it during the month. We had 13 total pieces, and again, it was about a dozen different stories that were told through this art. And again, with the responses that it gave people a look into people's lives in a different way that they wouldn't normally have. Something different from the library. Like, you don't expect to go see an art show at the library all the time, and something that themed like this also. Oops. And again, you know, the yay, library is a safe space. That's my favorite one, my favorite response. The last one was a week and a half ago. So I'm a little tired. This one we had the funding from California Humanities for, so we did it in a big way. Originally, we were thinking of like an open mic performance kind of thing, but then I went to one of Kristin's story jams, and I was like, I want to do that, but different. So what we did was we made it a themed night. The storytellers had to pre-register, which is different from a normal story jam where they just sign up when they're there. They had to tell me a little bit about what they were going to tell for their story to make sure that it fit within our theme of coming to California. We didn't limit it from, you know, you have to come from a different country. It was just, you have to come from somewhere else. And most people in California have come from somewhere else. So we had a lot of stories. But the funding that we had, we were able to create a little pizzazz about it. We spent a lot of the money on the marketing. We rented a space downtown in Fresno, so we had an actual theater with a sound system and lights. We created these little notebooks that had our logo and then the California The Journey logo on it so that we could give it away as memorabilia for everyone that attended. And we got speakers, and it started slow. We had like 2 people with like 3 weeks to go, and I was panicking that no one was going to do this. And then it started picking up steam, and I ended up with too many speakers. We actually ran out of time for one of them, which was a bummer, but we had all these people that got up there and told their stories, and all of these stories were incredibly different, and yet at the same time they were the same. And that was the most important thing that came out of this. We had stories from a guy told a story about his grandmother surviving through the Armenian genocide. We had a Laos refugee that told her story, her family story. We had a couple DACA stories, which were incredibly brave for them to stand up and tell those stories. We had some stories about crossing the border, both legally and illegally. And we even had this woman that was a 3rd-generation American. Her family are migrant workers. She was traveling for the first time by herself from Texas to California. She's 16 years old. She's on a Greyhound bus, and immigration stops the bus, and they harass her because they think she's an immigrant. And so she was told this story about being profiled. We had 60 people attend and a great return rate on the surveys. We had 50 surveys returned. We got permission to record everybody, so we live streamed it. You can watch them. They're available on our Facebook and also on the californiathejourney.blogspot.com. They are still there. They've had about 500 views last time I looked, which was awesome. And the stories, they were different, but they were the same. Like, that was the thing that came through there, is like everybody has these stories, and there's a piece that connects them all. And the responses were incredibly heartwarming and positive, that I learned about my community members. I learned that, you know, you can't just dump people in a group. Everyone has their own personal story, and that there are similarities between all these stories. And California Humanities had some extra questions for us to ask on our surveys. And the one was, what was the big idea, the big thing that you took away from this program? And it was like the whole theme of what we've been doing with our storytelling is that the storytelling is powerful. It empowers you, it informs you, it has the ability to change your mind. And I also very much enjoyed I'm not alone in this. The folks that told their DACA stories afterwards, they were talking to each other and realizing that their stories were incredibly similar. So it was very heartwarming. And then we asked about if they had any other comments, and the most surprising one for me was one that came that said, listening to these stories made me realize how privileged I am. Like, how often does that happen that you can sit back and say, whoa, I'm privileged? Because it doesn't happen that often. After the live portion, we actually included the listening station. So the person that we ran out of time for was able to still record her story. And then we had another person that came along and recorded their story after that. And that's the kind of thing that we want to continue to do going forward. We want to be able to take the listening station to more of these events that it would fit into so that people can record their stories. They get a copy of it, we get a copy of it. So if they give us permission, we can add it to our collection so that everyone will be able to have access to it. We want to continue doing the story jams. They've been incredibly popular, but we also want to be able to change it up a little bit, do themed nights like we did with this one. And, maybe we can continue doing a huge event of it every night, or not every night, every year. And then some of the other branch staff have said, these events have been pretty cool. And someone's contacted me and said, how can I do a potluck? What was involved? Don't do it. Let me give you the list of things involved. Do it small. And then the art hop, we do that. It doesn't go away, and it didn't cost anything. It was something that we already do. Let's just theme it. And of course, we're always looking for new ways to do things and new resources and new experiments to try out with these storytelling projects that we do. That's okay. Any questions, comments, or suggestions? Dan, that surprised me. I'm sorry. I was rushing to get through that because that's okay. Are there any questions? Yes.
Okay, so how did you recruit the storytellers during the story jam? Did you put out a mass?
I'll take this one. So the question is, how did we recruit our storytellers? For the story jam, we put it on Facebook and we have it out there, and the community is aware. For mine, it was complicated, but we put it out on Facebook. We took out an ad in our local newspaper, both the English and the Spanish, and then I reached out to my community network. I work specifically with citizenship and immigration, so I have this huge network of people, and I reached out to them and got a few storytellers specifically from that group of people that I work with, and then it was a lot of word of mouth. One of the questions that we asked on our survey was, how did you hear about this? And the majority of it was word of mouth. So someone saw it on Facebook, and then they told someone, and then they told someone, and then we were able to get people to participate.
I have another question too. I was just concerned, the people who spoke about immigrating illegally, or the DACA people, like in this area, sometimes the ICE will show up at the courthouse, or where they have people that are illegal immigrants are there, so that they can take them when they're done, or whatever. Was that a concern?
So. Yeah, the question is about, the idea of safety with telling stories about immigration, both legal and illegal, about ICE showing up because, ICE. And we considered it is this going to be a thing? But we haven't had much of that happening in Fresno, even with as conservative as Fresno can be. We haven't had a lot of issues with safe spaces not being safe spaces. And we told the storytellers straight up, tell us what you want. We're not going to ask you, what is your status? I don't care what your status is. Just tell me your story. So it was up to them on what they were willing to share. It was up to them on whether we would record them or not. We gave them that option. And it was up to them to share their story. And it was important enough to them to share their story with us. And I guess the word of mouth didn't spread that far. So. Are there any other questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any age restrictions on your program?
So the question is, do we have any age restrictions?
Or are you talking about like just generally?
Just generally.
Or just these?
We have a Kids Inc. Writers Club,
Uh-huh.
our branch, and we have children who write down their own stories, and then we put them on the website. This would be pretty cool if they could actually color their stories as well.
We for the story jams, we keep it sort of an all ages event. We actually do have a family that repeatedly shows up. They bring they're not small children, but they're under 12, and we've never had anybody go over the PG-13 limit. We do set that limit for our weekly programs because we want it to be open. Politi branch is so small that we're right next to the children's area. So we do have to be a little careful there. And it is a family program. And we've never had anybody, even a story that could potentially involve some adult content. People are very conscious in what they, if there are children present, what they say. So,
for our main event, we kept the same rule of PG-13. We did have some young folks there, so it was actually really nice to have them involved. We had one gal that told her story that was 17, and she told her story, and it was one of the most powerful ones that we had up there. It was incredible that someone that young would be that brave to have to tell their story. So, yes. Yeah, so the question is, did we have time frame for the stories? We, for the monthly story jam, we limit it to 5 minutes. For mine, it was a 2-hour program, so we asked them to keep it as close to 5 minutes as possible, but we let them run up to about 7.5. We actually had these really cool signs that our graphics department made that were like, wrap it up, please, which is what I'm being told right now, actually. So wrap it up, please. Is there one last question, anybody? Yes. So language barriers, for the main story jam event that we did we offered to let people tell their story in their native language, and one of my community partners offered a translator, a professional translator for it, but not a single storyteller asked to tell their story in any language other than English. And we had one gentleman who was older that had some struggles, but it made the story better, honestly. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
Please fill out the surveys and drop them off over in the box. And we do have a couple handouts, and our business cards are over there if you have any questions for later on. So, thank you.